This is an important event tonight, a series of events where we, the community, get to engage in the process of planning what we want this great city to look like as we go forward. Next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and even 50 years from now, there's things that you will engage in tonight that will have an influence decades into the future. And so it's important that you're here, and it's important that you're active in this process. If you're here to have the city tell you where we intend to build the next strip mall or the next batch of houses or the next grocery store, you're in the wrong place. That's not what will happen tonight. What you're going to see tonight, once I get out of the way, is a great team of folks out of planning that are going to talk a little bit about what are the things that cause that kind of development to occur. But then the most important part of the evening is at the end of those presentations, your opportunity to engage in the process of sharing ideas. There's a lot of things that your city government does using your tax dollars to influence the way the city grows. We build roads, we put in infrastructure, build schools, all those kind of things that certainly influence the way the community grows. But at the end of the day, it's typically private behaviors, it's private investment that actually decides what happens. You know, there's a lot of places you can go and you can see a road out there, it can be a beautiful road, and as you drive down, there's absolutely no buildings on either side of it. Now, why is that? It's because private investors haven't chosen to make those kind of investments and build those buildings, despite the road being there. Certainly, the existence of the roads influences that process, but we don't get to decide where all the buildings go. We don't decide where all those private dollars are invested. So certainly look forward to spending tonight engaging with you on those ideas. We want y'all to do a lot of speaking when we get to that point, because that's really the most important part of tonight. So we're excited that you're here. We're excited to be engaged in this process, and we certainly look forward to hearing what you, the community, what you want this city to look like. So thanks for being here.
I've told everyone, listen, every single event we've had, every single survey we've done, every bit of outreach we've done has been phenomenally well attended and has been attended by people who clearly are very interested in what they want the future of the city to become. And that is, as a planner, I cannot tell you how difficult it is to deal with apathy. It is so hard to get folks who really aren't interested in the future or don't want to take part in developing their future to come out and develop something, because then when you want to see that implementation happen, when you want to see build out occur, it becomes almost impossible to do so. So I'm going to give you a quick look at our agenda, do some quick welcomes and introductions, and then you're going to hear two speakers. I'm going to go second. Lakey Boyd, who is a market and economic development consultant working with us, is going to talk a little bit about the future of commercial development and the way we've been doing, the way the country really has been doing commercial development for the last 20, 30, 40 years is changing, and it's changing radically. And Lakey's going to talk a lot about what that looks like and then how it may affect the city of Huntsville. And then I'm going to come in on the back end of that and talk about a little something that we call gray fields. Some of you may be familiar with that term, some of you might not. But that is something I think most of you notice, and it doesn't take long. You can be here for 15 minutes, drive up and down the Parkway, and you're going to see gray fields, or drive up and down University Drive and you're going to see gray fields. So we're going to talk a little bit about those, what causes those, how you remedy them, how you encourage economic redevelopment in those, and then we're going to do our breakout sessions. I think a lot of you saw the pieces of those out in the lobby. We're going to send you guys out. That's going to be your opportunity to really engage some of the other planners with the city to talk a little bit about what could happen on certain strategic sites after we've kind of gone through our presentations. As well, because of the venue, I'd like you to hold your questions, if you would, until the ends of the presentations, and you can either ask some of the planners when you go out and participate in the breakout exercises, or Lakey and I, when we're done, we're going to hang out in here. If you have questions that you want to ask, we will stay here. We are routinely the last people to leave these events. We will stay here until the school kicks us out, and you can ask questions of us. We definitely want to hear from you. If you have things that you want to learn a little bit more about, or you just want to ask questions or offer a comment, we will be here to listen to you.
So I have been charged this evening with forecasting and telling you all about, with my magic crystal ball, the future of commercial development. It is a pretty big endeavor. I could probably stand up here and talk for the rest of tonight. But I have chosen to give you some context and how to think about it, and then I'm going to talk through some of the big trends, and then like Dennis said, we'll turn it back over and really do a much deeper dive into retail redevelopment when Dennis returns. So where I want to start is with the idea of innovation. When you look at this timeline, and this is a very typical, right, technology that's happened since the 1800s to now, the things that jump out at you are the invention of electricity, the car, the plane, the polio vaccine, the mapping of the human genome. And all of those are obviously huge, significant advances in terms of technology and science and industry. But I really want to challenge you to start to think about innovations that are happening in an everyday way, that changes our life in an everyday way, that has the biggest personal level impact. So what I mean by that is, for example, toilet paper, invented 1877. I would venture that no one in this room would raise their hand and tell me that's an unimportant innovation to you personally, right? So it impacts your daily life. Just like sliced bread, if you think through when it was that we had to fresh bake bread, let the dough rise, bake it, have to slice it ourselves, and now we can go into a store and get it. I don't think a family could put dinner on the table these days without a microwave, for instance. And then clearly the invention of the internet, both in terms of our personal life and our professional life. So I'm really trying to give you a context of the way innovation happens, the way it happens on large levels and small scale. And that is really what is shaping how things are happening in terms of commercial development, in terms of how we're moving forward into the future. This slide gives you the last several years, some of the big major innovations that have happened. And again, pointing out that I think 2008, without question, we all know was the start of the Great Recession. But even last year, I think a lot of people don't realize that the number of mobile devices, the number of connections that are happening is actually exceeded the number of actual people on the planet. So these are the kinds of things that are happening on a daily basis that is a continuous, I guess I'd say fluid back and forth, informing the market, and thus the market responds, right? So what I want to talk about tonight is the impact of those innovations around how we shop, how we work, and how we make things and how we move things. So that's going to impact retail, it's going to impact office, it's going to impact industrial. I want to walk through each of those, kind of give you an idea of what some of the big trends are, and then how they're impacting that kind of commercial development. So how we shop. I think first and foremost, I wouldn't necessarily call it an innovation, right? But certainly a big change that has happened is the hourglass economy. There's a lot of different ways of saying this, but the bottom line is there's a whole lot less people in the middle class, and there's more at the lower end, there's more at the higher end. It goes by a lot of phrases, 1% versus 99%, but the bottom line is that it has had a huge impact in terms of what people are spending their money on, the amount of money they have they're spending their money on. There's a recent survey that was done, and it is now that the least number of Americans self-identify as middle class than at any other time in American history, well under 50%, whereas people that are self-identifying as lower middle class or lower class has been increasing ever since the recession. So we know that that is starting to change how retail is being delivered in our communities. The next piece of the puzzle is online shopping versus physical storefronts, so bricks and mortar. Online sales is now roughly 40% of retail overall. It is continuing to grow. It is growing at a very rapid pace each and every year. It started from a place of convenience and even some price shopping comparison. But it really has continued to evolve. Most retailers today now have some kind of online and physical presence, and then, as you know, there are retailers like Amazon that only have an online. We have seen a fluid change happen where in the beginning, people would go to a store as a showroom and then go buy something online, and now we have a phenomenon called web rooms where people shop online and then go to a physical storefront. The bottom line is that it is a very fluid relationship that is happening between the two, but it is having a huge impact on what physical space is and how much of it there is. I want to be clear as I lead into this next piece about sharing and renting and kind of the shared economy, that I think a lot of people understand it as, Zipcar, or whether it be, snow skis and renting those. The bottom line is that you take a commodity, an underutilized asset, and somebody is going to pay a portion of that money so they don't have to buy it themselves. It started out absolutely out of the economic crisis. Certainly the maturation of the social web has had a huge impact, but I think a lot of people feel like it's a niche market, or that it really is only for a certain subset of the population, right? Those young kids, and that's who does that. It's now estimated that is a 110 billion with a B marketplace worldwide, and more importantly, 50% of consumers have participated in the shared economy, and that number is projected to be growing exponentially over the next 5 years in particular. So it has a big impact in the way that transactions are happening. So what does that mean for retail? Without question, the role, the purpose of the storefront is completely changing. So obviously we have a lot of retailers closing. Those that still are there, it is very much about the experience. It's very much about an interaction. It's also about expertise. So I can go online, I can Google, I can find 3,000 options, right? But what do I need? I need somebody to help me understand, what do I need to buy, what's going to be the best fit. That leads into customer service. There's a huge demand, whether online or physical stores, for an increased customer service. As the market has moved to either discount retailers or more online, there is a higher and higher demand for people to increase that customer service level. Also tied to that is what we're seeing of the number of retailers that are closing over the middle market evaporating. So back to that hourglass economy, what we know is that retailers that had the middle market as their target, as their sweet spot in their method of making a profit, they are largely closing or at a minimum downsizing. So off the top of your head, you can think of examples like Circuit City, Borders. It's certainly why JCPenney and Sears are struggling today. That really has been who they've been. And again, I'm not saying all retailers. Discount retailers and high-end retailers are doing well, but that middle market is largely squeezing the former big box retailers, either because of online sales or kind of at the other end of the spectrum, more and more small, locally operated, individually owned storefronts, kind of back to Main Street, that are really curating an experience, that are experts at goods and really crafting what people experience when they go into their stores. The size and location of space is really changing. It's smaller across the board. So even think of the largest big box retailers, and even discount retailers are in this category. They are largely downsizing their footprint. As they build new, their prototypes are a much smaller footprint, and a lot of that has to do with more and more sales are going online, so they're trying to find the right equilibrium point to get those things jiving all together. I would also say that retail is getting a lot more integrated. It used to be for many, well, at least a few decades, we were building strip centers that only had retail in them. And that really is changing, where retail built new is going into mixed-use centers or going into places where people are that perhaps retail hasn't always been. It's also getting into much more urban locations. Wherever the consumers are, retail is trying to get into a small space as close as they can to them. Lastly, and shopping is in quotation marks here, and certainly this is something happening in Huntsville, shopping centers or strip centers are not solely retail centers anymore, right? So you can think about this just in your own day-to-day experience. You go to office uses there, things like your dentist or the tax preparer. There's also community uses going into these strip centers. Everything from, say, a tutoring service, a nonprofit organization, to actual government offices taking over empty space. So these are some of the ways that retail is responding to the innovation and the changes that are happening in how we shop. So when we think through how we work, right? I think it goes without saying the Great Recession and the job loss that happened with that has had a massive impact on how we work. But the things that I want to pull out beyond the obvious job loss, and even as that has been gained back, the two big things that are the takeaways right now are that our long-term unemployment, so that's any time more than 6 months, is still continuing to be approximately 1/3 of all unemployed. So when you stop and think about that loss of time in a career in terms of a trajectory, in terms of potential long-term wealth creation, that has a big impact. The other piece of that unemployment that's significant is youth unemployment, which is actually age 16 to 24. So anybody that comes out of high school, and even some college graduates or associate degrees, are in that category. And they have the highest unemployment of any age group, nearly a quarter. So when you really stop and think about that in terms of them entering the workforce and starting to make contributions, again, a significant impact in how we're working and how that's changing. Related to that is that our work environments are getting a lot more flexible. This is something that probably each of you in this room have experienced in some fashion. The most recent survey that came out just 2 months ago is showing that less than 50% of the American workforce spends their time at their desk on an average workday. So that idea of people going and sitting at a desk 9 to 5 all day is drastically changing. Now, it could be a combination of reasons, right? It could be because you're in internal team meetings. It could be client meetings. It could be travel. It could be co-work or shared office or work from home. It could be a lot of reasons, but the fact that we have started to tilt and we're actually now at less than 50% is having a huge impact on how and where and when office space is being built. The last piece of the puzzle to understand about work is the gig economy. So that's just another way of saying freelance, except that it's really become much more sophisticated, much more elevated. When I say a gig, it can be a very high skill, high wage, software development. It can be a very low skill, low wage, who will go pick up my groceries for me because I don't have time today. It really is a range, but again, I think a lot of people view this as a temporary solution, as a outcome of the economic crisis, but we now estimate close to 55 million American workers, which is 1/3 of the American workforce. This is now how people are putting their careers together. This is now how people are choosing to work that even have an option to go into a more corporate environment. On the flip side, the corporate HR folks are telling us that by 2020, they estimate at least 20%, kind of depending on industry, it can be a lot higher, of their workforce they're planning for it to be contract workers. They're deteriorating benefits, as it's called, so that they have that as less of a carry and more going directly to paying workers. So what's that mean for our office space? Far and away, it means it's getting a whole lot smaller. In the 70s, the average square foot per worker was between 500 and 700 square feet. Today, we're closing in on 150 square feet per worker. Depending on the business, depending on the industry, it can be smaller. And then you throw in ideas like an office share or flex space, and that average really is getting smaller as communal space is becoming more important and team environments are working more. The location of space is really changing. Again, it is an exercise in going where people are. So it used to be the office pretty much happened in in towers and downtown buildings and in office parks. And more it's going into, as I was just saying, former retail centers, but it is going into a smaller space into mixed use environments. We're seeing much more of the co-working idea or office share and that kind of thing. The amenities for workers, I think, has really increased dramatically in its importance and is really influencing where companies are choosing to either start or to expand. And what I mean by that is that it really is much more about lifestyle. It's less about convenience. It's less about, can I get a sandwich or pick up my dry cleaning convenient to my office? As those kind of personal, professional lines blur, just like us, answering emails at 9 o'clock at night, as that blurs, so does the location of work and home. I think that it's important to understand that the industry drivers, when you talk about how office space is being built nationwide, are largely knowledge-related industries and energy-related industries. So that is definitely relevant to Huntsville and the kind of economic structure that you have. That's not to say that other sectors aren't having an impact, but those are the ones that are really driving the direction of how office space is being built. Lastly, I have to mention the importance of being a talent attractor, in the startup idea. So there is a lot of discussion around recent entrepreneurship numbers, and are we growing or are we not? The bottom line is that entrepreneurs and small businesses are still not only the foundation, but the majority of businesses in America. So it's very important to understand where talent wants to be, because that informs both entrepreneurship, but it also informs the kind of workforce that you have access to for a variety of types of companies. As much as the idea of urban, and that's what everybody wants these days, I really kind of use interchangeably the idea of the core or the center. It really is about a centrality exercise. It really is about convenience and amenities and a mix of uses close to me. That doesn't mean that I have to be in New York or Chicago to do it, but it does mean a certain kind of environment and a certain kind of texture to that. So how we make things, how we move things. There's been a lot of changes and strides in this in recent years. Exports are up in America 10% higher than pre-recession levels. So I think a lot of people don't realize the resurgence of American manufacturing. Again, a big piece of that is right here in Huntsville. As that has happened, what's most important to understand about American manufacturing production increasing and exports increasing is that, yes, that impacts industrial space because those goods have to be stored somewhere and before they get shipped, right? Whether overseas or domestically. But exports are really important to an economy because it's bringing outside dollars into your local economy. Those then circulate and kind of raise up that idea of what I'm spending on retail or what I'm spending on other kinds of goods and services. The maker movement, this is something that either you have no idea what I'm talking about, or you think it is just hobbyists and tinkerers. It's those people in their garage or the people that, do go to Dragon Con and, are into R2-D2. No, I am here to tell you it's much, much more than that. I am a big believer in the maker movement, is directly tied to the resurgence in American manufacturing. The bottom line is, if it's a made in America, whatever it is, it's part of the maker movement. So I'm bringing it up because I really want the economic impact to be understood. So beyond the hobbyist tinkerer, which absolutely is part of this, it is as much about jams and jellies and gourmet foods, as it is software development and multimedia, as it is building new machines and 3D printing and value-added manufacturing. The bottom line is there's a business aspect to this, and it has a significant economic impact that's important to be understood. The last piece is e-commerce and supply chain. So as I said at the beginning, retail's having a big impact, right, by online sales, but e-commerce is both business to consumer and business to business. So what matters here is that we're estimating we're at a $265 billion market, and it is growing exponentially to the point that really delivery services can't keep up with the shift in those online sales and how quickly and easily those packages arrive right at your home. So as that happens, it's impacting the need for warehouse space, but it's also pushing things back in the supply chain where it would have been at a showroom or a retail storefront. It's now in a distribution center, and those locations of distribution centers are changing as well. So how does that impact industrial? The consumer consumption returning both after the Great Recession, but also the way that it has responded to the innovations and the methods that we use to purchase goods and services. It has just as much of an impact on retail as it does industrial, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily intuitively get that relationship. There's an increase in what are called big box distribution centers, which are not for big box retail stores. They just literally mean they're big boxes of industrial space. So those big, giant, million-square-foot facilities. But we're also seeing an increase in that very small scale, locally produced, craftsman, artisan production. There's a demand for that, and thus it is growing, and we see a continued need for that. The size of space, we're kind of at the two ends of the spectrum. You know, it's either the really huge facilities or it's really micro. Think furniture maker is back on Main Street, right? Where is a coffee bean roastery? Is it out in an industrial park, or is it in a neighborhood commercial node? The location, the other piece of that is what's called location logic. So the short version of what that means in industrial development is people needing to be closer to metro areas because of the way that e-commerce is working and smaller delivery and quicker deliveries are happening. So it's really cropping up a new type of industrial that is primarily about getting those goods to you a whole lot quicker. The amenities for workers is important here, not as important as office, but it used to be that if you worked industrial, you drove in, you went to your shift, you brought your lunch, and you drove back home. There is now somewhat of a desire that at least some basic convenience services are around that. And then lastly, in terms of industry drivers, I've already touched on trade. Ports is pretty obvious with the expansion of Panama Canal and port cities and markets. Food is one thing that's expanding that I think is kind of under the radar, but if you just think about your own personal experience, the fact that Walmart, Target, Costco, Sam's now carry groceries and fresh foods as much as the demand for organic foods, that has really increased the demand for cold storage and food distribution in those kind of facilities. The last thing I want to touch on, which is probably one of the most important things and I think has a really important tie to Huntsville, is the idea of the industrial internet, Internet of Things, Internet of Everything. There's a lot of phrases around it. But I think a lot of people think about the internet as connecting people, and certainly social media, and isn't the point of the internet, Facebook, and that's it. But the reality is it connects a whole lot of machines, right? It connects a whole lot of devices. It makes things go. There's a lot of digital information. So the estimate now, GE, as you might know, is really transitioning even the format of their services and their company and what they're focusing on. But their estimate is that over the next 20 years, the industrial internet is going to have a $15 trillion impact on the global GDP. Just to give you an idea, there's an estimate that there's roughly 10 billion with a B devices connected to the internet right now. In the next 5 years, by 2020, the estimate is that we're going to be at about 500 billion devices and machines connected to the internet. So everything that's going on in automation, but also in delivering all those kind of pieces. So what's the big takeaway, right? So what does this mean for my community? What's this mean for Huntsville in particular? I think that the big takeaway, shocking I know, is that the Great Recession increased vacancies across all commercial sectors. I don't think it's a news flash per se, except that the work I do in a lot of communities, everybody wants to know, well, when we get back to normal, when we return. And the reality I'm here to share with you is that there is not a return to. This is the new normal. We could spend a lot of time on, the basic economic premise of an artificial economy that got inflated, and we have a whole lot of extra space. And given how we're shopping, how we're working, how we're making and moving things, there's a surplus of commercial space in this country. I would say it's even probably more so in the South, particularly when it comes to retail. A lot of people that deal in commercial markets have a saying that we're not over-retailed as a country, we are under-demolished as a country in terms of commercial development. So I'm always such a bright ray of sunshine in these kind of, presentations. I think that is really true in the South. Without question, we have some of those issues right at hand this evening in Huntsville, and Dennis is going to talk a lot more about that in detail. But I challenge that the same thing's happening in office and industrial, or at least what is there needs to be rethought of how it's used. So I challenge really thinking about how can we get office more integrated and even industrial. Again, back to that kind of craftsman, artisan. Right now, a lot of regulations won't allow those businesses to be in a core central place close to where people are. My last 2 points, technology is important to all sectors, and I think a lot of time it gets kind of, sidelined to one kind of element, but take everything from online sales and retail to technology connecting workers to the industrial internet having to do with industrial. And as I already touched on, that idea of urban, this growing demand for urban across the country is not just about large metropolitan areas. It is absolutely about cities like Huntsville, where people are just hungry for a core, for an urban type of experience, but they don't necessarily want to be in a metropolis. They just want everything to be very convenient, very amenitized, and I think that that really translates to a community like this. So I think that giving you a context of how those innovations are happening, what they're either responding to or what they're creating a new market for, that's really what's informing the direction of commercial development in this country. I think all of those things that I've touched on are absolutely happening right here. And as I said earlier and Dennis introed, we are going to talk through in more detail what's happening here in Huntsville and give you an opportunity to weigh in on what some of those local solutions might be. Thank you.
And now we're going to talk about what some of the local impacts are. Anyone who's been to the website for the big picture, and I'm sure you all have been to the website multiple times, especially when you signed up for the newsletter, which you all read religiously, you've probably seen this image. This is one that I reference. It does not take a lot of time in Huntsville to figure out. We have, as Lakey pointed out, a lot of commercial space. We have a lot of retail space on the ground. It only takes a drive up and down the Parkway in particular, north and south, to see the breadth and depth of commercial space that exists. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we call gray fields and how we do what is called strip recovery. So the first point I want to get to is what are gray fields when we talk about that? Planners, like most professions love to sort of gin up their own terms. And this came on the heels of what planners call green fields and brown fields. Green fields are basically big grassy areas that you can go and just build anything on. Brown fields are former industrial areas that may have some level of contamination associated with them and have redevelopment challenges there. Gray fields are related to those. They are typically commercial areas, most often strip centers, most often retail, but they can be office as well. They don't have the environmental challenges of brown fields, and obviously they've already been developed, unlike green fields, but typically they're defined by their age. Some folks say, well, the gray field comes from all the pavement that's there and the fact that it's so old that it's not that nice dark pavement anymore, it's that kind of pale gray pavement. And some folks say it's because of the age of the commercial development associated with it. But they are those strip centers, and we have been building these sorts of strip centers and these sort of retail and commercial centers for 50 years now, and we have been building them like gangbusters. And for a long time, that was great. We were a very mobile society. We liked being in our car. We built lots of roads. It was easy to get around. It was fantastic. We could build them, and a new one would come along, and we'd go shop there, and then another new one would come along, and we'd go shop there, and it was awesome. But a lot of stuff got left behind, and now we have to figure out what to do with it. So we start looking at where are these gray fields, how do we identify them? Some metrics say, well, it's when your capture per square foot is less than $150 per square foot. Generally, you can identify them. They're centers that aren't necessarily fully occupied or even close to half occupied. And in some cases, or in almost all cases, there's a lot of competing retail, sometimes thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of square feet within a 5-mile radius of the center. That's when you start to get gray fields. We have a few examples. You'll notice as I pan through these, some of these are newer and still have some vacancies. Some of them have not necessarily aged into gray fields. They're also of a variety of sizes. You'll notice as well they have no shortage of parking, and you'll notice that they can be found, especially if you're familiar with Huntsville and you recognize all these places, they can be found pretty much in every corner of our city. Are you tired of seeing all that? I've actually got a lot more. That is not even close to every strip center in this community. And I had to, you'll have to pardon this, when I saw that and I looked at all the retail development we built out in all these strip centers, it brought me to mind of this old quote from Ozymandias. On the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings, look on my works, ye mighty, in despair. Nothing beside remains, round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. There's something there about how we've created these incredibly grand retail centers and these broad swaths of commercial strip, and yet they are slowly, despite our great design, slowly being developed into obsolescence and irrelevance. But that doesn't mean we can just leave them behind. Now, one of the important things to understand is the dynamics of gray fields, and Lakey started to touch on it a little bit, why these things actually happen. A lot of times when these things grew up, they followed demand and they followed population, and as certain areas grew in population, these strip centers popped up as well. You wanted shopping to serve the new population. The problem is there was always a bit of an imbalance, and Urban Land Institute will frequently say that if you would get, during this period of kind of strip center growth, if you got a 1% spike in population, you got a corresponding 7% spike in land use. Well, you start to see a little bit of the imbalance there, that you're growing in a population in a certain way, but you're growing and eating up your land a lot faster. I think anyone who's seen the map of Huntsville or has seen our little graph of how Huntsville's expanded over the decades probably kind of gets that sense that that is very much applicable here. Another thing that can both cause and be an effect of gray fields is the fact that all communities, and this is an important point that we talk about a lot in other presentations, all communities experience disinvestment, all of them. They all go through age cycles. They all experience these highs when everything is booming in a community. They all experience lows when folks are moving out and things are for sale and yards don't look quite so kept up. And this occurs on a citywide scale and it occurs on a neighborhood scale. And these happen everywhere. And the problem is, with the ease of retail being able to move out of these neighborhoods, what's left behind, these empty shopping centers, can frequently sort of maintain or prolong these eras of disinvestment and actually make it harder for neighborhoods surrounding them to come back out. Part of the issue as well is that because it's almost disposable architecture. They're not really built to last a long time. You've probably seen some out there that are 30, 40 years old. They're really not designed to last or be sustained more than 20 years. The folks who build them are looking down the road within a couple of decades and not really thinking about what gets left behind. A lot of that model is based on what's the next big thing. This was great shopping and this was really cool for a long time, but now I'm going to open something about a half mile down the road and now this is cool and this is the new place to shop. And everybody goes down there, and then as the old strip falls into decay, it starts to have an effect on the community that surrounds it. And a part of it is, I work for the city, and I will acknowledge some complicity in this. You reap what you zone, and we definitely chase commercial zoning, and we overzone for commercial, and as a result, it becomes very easy for someone to build new commercial down the road. We probably have zoned pure commercial more than we have the capacity for, and that's on us to it's on the city and in cooperation with the community to look at and say, how do we address that? How do we fix that? Because we have been overbuilding, we've been overdeveloping retail without an idea of how when the older developments age out, what happens there. So we've got, a lot of folks have talked about this. This is not something that happens solely in Huntsville. This is a concern across the country. I could argue we probably have a little bit more of it here, more of our fair share of it here. But folks have come up with this sort of 12 steps for strip recovery. It is kind of an addiction. And the first process is obviously acknowledging that you have a problem. But a lot of communities are dealing with this, and a lot of communities are being very aggressive about how they rehab strip. There are steps and there are strategies out there to recapture that land. The first one is actually one of the reasons we're here today, and that's develop public leadership. And I'm not just talking about the mayor or talking about planning, but I'm talking about getting people invested and making the changes needed to accommodate what Lakey sees in the new economy and to accommodate how we can redevelop these strip centers. Really getting folks aware there is a problem, there is an issue, we need to all work together to address it. We also want to create partnerships. There are a lot of different interests out there. There are a lot of potential, say, large landowners who may be interested in saying, hey, if the city's amenable to helping me with my zoning or helping me with some infrastructure, I might be willing to more readily redevelop these centers. At the same point, you also want to involve stakeholders. Redeveloping these centers can have a very large impact, and you want to make sure that the neighborhoods surrounding it are aware of what's going on, and frequently they can offer ideas as to how to make those centers better integrate with the surrounding neighborhoods. And you also want to develop some sort of mechanism for management. The city can do a certain amount, but I like to point to Downtown Huntsville, Inc. as a great example of kind of an area-specific management tool to really look at and push for and advocate for change within a specific area. And this is something you could see in the next 5 or 10 years, a South Parkway improvement district or a North Parkway improvement district or a University Drive improvement district. These sort of things where they get up in the morning and they go to bed at night thinking about the improvements and how to redevelop those districts. Another thing, and it's what Lakey had just been alluding to, is anticipating how that market's going to change. As she just went through in great detail, retail competition is not only intensifying, it's changing. The demand for that square footage is shrinking. The buyers are changing. As she went through, what we're looking for and how we're looking for it and how we're engaging in that shopping process are changing. And yet we have a lot of the square footage left behind that is serving a model that is beginning to die out. But in response, you're starting to see it. Retail development is changing. The things that you see coming out of the ground are starting to get a variety and respond to those market pressures. I think Providence is an excellent example. Lendon coming out of the ground is an excellent example, where you see more of a mix of uses, where it becomes, it's very drivable but also walkable, but it is responding to the way that our shopping habits are changing. And also, and I think Lakey also touched a bit on this, consumers, what they're looking for in a shopping experience is changing. And I will apologize to the folks who have seen this, this graphic from me about 40 times. I use it a lot. I think it's one of the best kind of simple graphics to talk about where the current commercial development model is starting to fail us. And this is done by an artist in Atlanta named R. Land, and he would do these kind of fake travel postcards, you know, like when you were a kid for Florida, and say, you know, come see sunny Florida, and inside the letters it would have a palm tree and an alligator and all these other things. Well, he did this one for greetings from Atlanta and no place like it. But then you look at what's in the block letters, and you see it's Best Buy and Target and Home Depot, and his joke obviously being, well, yeah, there are actually a whole lot of other places just like this. And I would never knock any of these stores. I spend a lot of money at Target, but these are not all that define us. They're not all that attract a community. They're not all that incentivize reinvestment, and they're not everything that the new consumer is looking for. And related to that, it's important to know your market. Whatever and however you plan, it's important to understand the people who are there, the people who are shopping, the type of business that they want to do, even on a parcel specific layer. If you're close to an artery and it's very easy for people to get in and out, and you have regional access, understand that your market is going to be different from someone who is farther away from regional transportation. So when we plan, you want to be area specific. You want to understand the context better. It kind of flies in the face of the idea that there's a one-size-fits-all approach to every single redevelopment. There's not. We have to actually go in and look at every single area and every single piece, because there are going to be different solutions to each, because they're going to be driven very much by their context. And you need to understand the local demands, because one of the things that would really sort of throw this whole process right out the window is if we build or design or plan for things that are just unrealistic. If they're not supported by the market, if they don't look at the changes that Lakey talked about, if they don't look at the demand and the desires and the shopping habits of the people who live here and work here, then they're doomed right from the get-go. One of the things that's a challenge is we know a lot of retail zone land, and we talk about it a little bit like a bush. You know, sometimes if you want a really healthy bush, you just think, I'm going to let that thing grow and just let it grow. I'm not going to touch it. But you know actually that the best way to do is to take off some of those limbs, because you may not have as big a plant in the end, but you would have a healthier plant. Well, retail zoned land is a little bit like that as well, and that the more you get, it sort of can cannibalize itself. So there's an opportunity here to actually prune some of that. You don't need to have every artery lined with commercial up and down the length of it, because it starts, again, to cannibalize itself. What you want to do is make sure your zoning is scaled to the market. And we have a lot of commercial zoning out there. That's probably a lot of folks out there like, you're not going to change my zoning, are you? The problem is, and again, this is a little bit of our fault in planning, is that we don't have a very flexible zoning ordinance. We don't have a lot of variety. We can't actually accommodate easily a lot of these new models of development. If you've ever done something like a Lendon or a Providence, if you've ever been paying attention, how many times those folks have to come back in front of city council to get a little change to this or a little variance for that, that is not encouraging to development. That's actually discouraging to development. The easier that we can make it from a city standpoint and an ordinance standpoint for the new model and the more productive model of development to occur, then the more likely it is to occur, and then the easier it gets to redevelop some of these challenged sites. Related to that, we want to pulse the development. Instead of having these corridors where it all starts to look the same, you can get a little more efficient by concentrating redevelopment at certain at intersections, taking advantage of the infrastructure that's at these cores. A lot of it is saying, it's great to be able to drive there, but you want to be able to walk and bike around those nodes as well. Density is okay. Selective density in certain areas, you get a lot more out of your tax dollar. You get a lot more when your tax dollars went and created infrastructure. When those strip malls sit there and underperform, that is basically your tax dollars underperforming. If you can get the development around those areas and take advantage of the infrastructure that you have on the ground, that is a better return on our tax dollars spent. And there are a lot of incentives out there. I'm a firm believer in much more carrot and a lot less stick. There are a lot of things that we can do in partnership with developers, in partnership with the private sector to encourage higher yield, more sustainable, more current redevelopment. We talk about things like TDRs, which are transfer of development rights, which is basically selling the zoning of one area to another area, so one area can develop more densely and the other area kind of stays as it is. It's a very nice kind of trade-off. There are BIDs, which are business or community improvement districts, which are really their own organizations that kind of self-tax and take that money and do local improvements to kind of create and enhance the characters in specific areas. There's also tax abatements. There are accelerated processing, all sorts of different approaches. I do want to take a moment. I know there was an article this morning talking a little bit about financing around Hazeland Square. We don't really have a position on that in planning right now because we're still so early in the planning process. For us, it's still about what the vision for that would be in the future. So I'm just telling you, when it comes to Q&A time and you come up to me afterwards, don't ask me about that because we haven't even thought about that yet. Another thing that's important to do is actually tame traffic. When we started developing these strip centers, really it was because everybody was very mobile. It was very easy to get around the car. These centers cater to the car very well, and that was okay. But as we're seeing folks get out of their cars more, as we're seeing more bike demand and more ped demand, we have to make sure that our streets and our networks better accommodate that. We talk a lot as planners, again, this is more planner talk, roads as a seam versus roads as an edge. And roads can serve both functions. Roads can divide communities, very large roads that are difficult to cross, or heavy traffic can divide communities, but roads as seams that are more walkable and more accessible can serve as edges to actually knit communities together. And in certain areas, it makes more sense for those to get away from being edges and get back to being seams. But again, we don't want to completely discourage traffic. We just want to make sure it moves well through these developments. Because I think some folks think, oh, planners hate traffic. They want to close all streets and just make it all pedestrian malls. That's not the case, because traffic is good for retail, but you want the traffic to be able to move well. We always like to say traffic is good, congestion is bad. Traffic means people moving by your stores. It means people bringing money to a certain neighborhood. It is okay, but it has to be intelligently managed. Another aspect is placemaking. I'm just going to keep throwing a few quotes at you. This is a favorite of one of my old bosses. This is from, he attributed it to Tom Wolfe in A Man in Full, talking about the only way you could tell you were leaving one community and entering another was that the franchises started repeating. I think we've probably all experienced that just here in Huntsville. If you drive out 72, there's probably a few places where you can see them repeat more than once. Again, franchises are okay, but there is a demand and a desire that we're seeing in the market for more unique and more place-specific development and more place-specific commercial and activity centers. It goes a little bit back to that Atlanta postcard. You know, it's great to have your Best Buy and your Target, but we're also looking for something a little bit more. We want to make these nodes a little more pedestrian-friendly. We want to draw people from various areas. Again, you know, we want this to work in the market as well, and more people means more value to a community. And it's important to remember design is important, and there are things the private sector can do and the public sector can do in partnership to ensure quality design in these developments so that it's not so compelling to move down the road to a new, shinier development in 10 or 20 years. And one of the main ways to do that is to emphasize the building over parking, especially you go along a lot of these corridors, and the first thing you see is asphalt, and there's a building way in the distance, and that was intentionally. They want to make sure you knew it was easy to park there. But that's not great for placemaking. I think you rarely kind of show off your favorite parking lots, unless, as my wife used to say when they were in high school, the parking lots were the place you hung out. You hung out in the Burger King parking lot or the Crystal parking lot. But in general, most of us aren't looking for that kind of experience. Going back really to one of the key points of what Lakey said is a lot of these things had been developed, and a lot of this was on our zoning. We zoned very large pieces. This is all going to be retail. This is all going to be office. And we're starting to see that fragment. We're starting to see these large pieces want to be retail and residential and office and institutional and cultural, all these things mixed together. That helps actually when you develop that way. It helps your land costs in terms of development. It helps you create a little bit more of a place. It helps you define those corridors so that you're not getting those, I'm waiting for the franchises to change so that I know I'm in a different community. And then also there's a value in high-density housing associated with these nodes. One is that it helps support a lot of the retail and commercial in those nodes, but two, it also reduces the pressure for redevelopment on neighborhoods. This can actually, a strategy to densify the corridors actually lessens the pressure to re-densify or introduce inappropriate density into single-family neighborhoods. So it actually is a way indirectly to protect existing neighborhoods. Because at the end of the day, another key is that more walking equals less driving. And this is not, again, we're not saying everyone get out of your cars. I have a car that I really, really like, and I like to be able to get into it and drive down to Ditto Landing whenever I want to, and I'd like to get into it, be able to drive to Costco whenever I want to. But we also want to have more choice. When I want to bike somewhere or when I want to walk somewhere, I want to be able to do that at the same time as well. We are seeing more and more demand for that. There's no really good way to put this other than this term, de-uglify. That is a legitimate goal. In doing this process, and we've been engaging folks now for, since May, if not earlier, one of the things we've heard about the comments on the Parkway aren't just, I wish you'd do something about the strip malls. It was, I wish you would just make it less ugly. Why is it so ugly? And there are things we can do. There are a lot of things that we can work with landowners and talk about how do we improve aesthetics. We get frequent questions about what do you do with the utilities? Everyone, we hear a lot on the message board, bury them, just bury all the utilities. You'll get a very pained look on Huntsville Utilities' face when you tell them that, just because they're thinking of the cost of that. But there are strategies we can do to mitigate the visual impact. In some cases, it's just more development around them means you see them less. In other cases, you can take opportunities to relocate the utilities to, say, the back of parcel. If you're going to get really progressive and really crazy, there's the push towards decentralizing our grid to creating more sort of small energy centers, so you don't have all these overhead lines running everywhere. But there are a lot of opportunities to do that, and really just a renewed emphasis in landscaping and lighting and plantings. There's nothing wrong with that, and frequently if you're working in partnership, if you're not imposing this as some sort of odious requirement, you're working in partnership to beautify, you will get good response out of ownership. There's no one, I think, ever really wants anything ugly. But we need to work with them to help do that. And we can zone for good design. And we're actually going to make sure that you all show up on Thursday as well, because it is a different session on Thursday. We're going to talk a little bit more about the tools to do that on Thursday. Talked a little bit about this earlier. Connectivity is king. Making sure that these are feasible for redevelopment is making sure that they're easy for folks to get to, whether it's in the car, whether it's on the bike, whether it's on foot, whether it's on a Segway or a horse or a golf cart, it doesn't matter. The best that you can connect into this development, the more likely it is going to be sustainable and successful. Instead of just these acres of parking, you want to create a circulation network within so that it starts to feel a little bit like a node, like a center, that there are maybe streets that aren't as heavily pedestrian traveled, but they're much more pedestrian friendly internal to the development. And you want to make sure it's easy to move back and forth among the land uses so that you don't have to go to the dentist, get in the car, go to the dry cleaner, get back in the car, go to the McDonald's, get back in the car, and go to something else. We want to make sure that those small trips, those small trips that can be unnecessary, can be made easier to do without. And again, this is back on us, aligning the policy with regulation. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of our city regulation does not actually accommodate things that Lakey's talking about. It's very difficult to do mixed-use and multi-use developments. It's our job to help make that easier. And we want to be able to talk about how when we put a road in, as John Hamilton mentioned at the start, that we actually get a good return, that when we do it, folks are interested in investing around it, that we can help with assembling parcels or putting together land deals, that our zoning accommodates that new mix of industrial and office and residential and commercial that folks want to see go on. Finally, 12th step, again, going back to the idea of partnerships. The city cannot do this alone. No one entity can really facilitate the level of redevelopment and reinvestment that needs to happen by itself. These are things that we need to do a good job outreaching with and be willing and say, the city is open for business. We want to partner with folks in order to see a new, better, more sustainable, and more neighborhood-friendly type of development. With that, thank you very, very much for coming out, for taking your Tuesday night.
Couldn't tell me we were busy, right?